Special thanks to Horizon Therapeutics for sponsoring today's Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Working tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics' mission at horizontherapeutics.com.
On any given night, I think there's anywhere between 250,000 to 300,000 people that are being trafficked in our country. Because to me, if even one is enslaved, then somebody somewhere needs to be doing something to free that one. Hey, bro, if that were your kid, you'd want an organization like ours going after him passionately as if it was your kid. You know what I mean? So we don't distinguish whether it's a Muslim boy or girl or an American little boy or girl. We can't.
That's our guest this week, Rolando Lopez. Rolando is a retired FBI agent who rescues victims of child sex trafficking through the Freedom Shield Foundation. He's a man on a mission to save as many people as he can. It's a truly inspiring story, and you'll hear it on this Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. Say hello to David Hirsch.
Hi, and thanks for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, Fathers Mentoring Fathers of Children with Special Needs, presented by the Special Fathers Network.
The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for dads to support dads. To find out more, go to 21stcenturydads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we'd be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad.
And now let's listen in on this conversation between Rolando Lopez and David Hirsch.
I'm thrilled to be talking today with Ro Lopez of Dallas, Texas, who's a father of two, a retired FBI special agent, security consultant, and outspoken advocate for counter child sex trafficking through an organization, a not-for-profit that he founded, the Freedom Shield Foundation. Ro, thank you for taking the time to do a podcast interview for the Special Fathers Network.
Thank you, David. Happy to be here.
You're the proud parent of two children. Let's start with some background. Where did you grow up? Tell me something about that.
Well, I grew up, I was born in Montana. I grew up in South Texas and ended up somewhere along the southwest border of Texas near San Antonio. Went to high school, a small town there, right on the border of Mexico, and then ended up going to school in Austin University. So it was a great upbringing.
Excellent. So out of curiosity, what did your dad do for a living?
My dad, as far as I can remember, was a jack of all trades. He did everything from selling insurance to being a milkman to doing all kinds of odd jobs. He ended up working for an insurance company, and around 37, when he turned 37, he wound up applying for the Border Patrol Academy, and at 8, which was the max age coming in. Now, prior to all that, prior to being a milkman and insurance guy, he was with the Air Force out of high school. At age 37, he joined the Border Patrol. And my dad he's just a tough guy. I've always called him like a man's man. Even now at 75 or 76, he's really fit. He's in great shape and stuff, and he's just a really good man. So he went into the Border Patrol. I remember the first week, I think I was in 4th grade at the time. He tore his what's his rotator, or it was some bad. Oh, he dislocated his shoulder. That's what it was, and they popped it back in place, and he stayed for the academy the next 2 or 3 months, or 3 to 4 months. So he's just really tough that way, And now, of course, he's paying the price, but he was with the Border Patrol another 25 years when he retired a couple years ago.
That's awesome. It sounds like you have a good relationship with him, and I'm wondering if there's one or two takeaways that when you think about your dad, in addition to being sort of a tough guy, physically fit, even at his age now, if there's any important learning lesson or takeaway.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, David, one of the things I do remember about him, that when I think about him, and it's funny, even at my age, to still call him, to call him dad. And in Spanish, he calls me mijo, which is my son, and it's a term of endearment that you're used to when, you're growing up. And, but my dad's always been a strong man of faith as well. So the images I have of him I can see him at my grandfather's church or other churches that we've been to when I was a kid. And I can see him, on his knees at the altar praying, just in the corner, as humble. He's a very humble man. And his dad was a great man as well.
So you're referring to your grandfather on your dad's side?
Yes. He was a preacher. I mean, he had a church for about 40 years, and he preached hellfire and brimstone, and he'd tick everybody off, and the church never grew above 30 members, that kind of church. But my grandfather was all about the widows and the orphans and taking food to people across the border and just widows there locally. And when he died before it was Christmas. I was probably around 18, I think, and he died of pneumonia, and he got pneumonia while building the house for a widow. But that's who my grandfather was. So he's just a good, solid man.
Excellent. Well, thanks for sharing. And I'm wondering, did you have a chance to meet your other grandfather? Did he play a role at all?
I remember him somewhat, but no, I think my grandmother on that other side had a lot more impact on my life than my grandfather did.
Didn't I remember that she was like one of the first Hispanics to graduate from somewhere? I don't remember where.
Yeah. In the 40s, she graduated from the Latin American Bible Institute. She was one of the first females to graduate from that. And she was another powerful, not necessarily an evangelist, but that woman could pray fire down on people, very powerful. And she was on my mom's side.
It sounds like you have some great roots, strong family values, and, you're well-grounded in your faith. So thanks for sharing.
Sure.
So let's talk about your career. From what I remember, you learned about the FBI when you were in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know who planted that seed or how that came about, but if you could just start there and roll forward.
Sure. I knew I was always, I think I was still a freshman when I was still playing with soldiers, those little green soldier guys. My dad was worried if I was ever going to grow up or not. But I know that about 10th grade, I already knew that I wanted to become an FBI agent. I was 14 at the time, but I knew that the FBI was going to be that number one organization I wanted to join. So I kind of did everything throughout my rest of my high school career, if you will, a whole 3 or 4 years in high school and then a couple years in college. So, well, it did happen.
So did you go right from college into the FBI, or what's the process?
Almost. I'll tell you, I was close. I was 21 when I applied, and I was going to have to take these language battery exams. Well, I might have known that you had to be 23 before you applied, but I figured, well, what's working happen? They'll bounce you out. Well, I passed my language test, and by then I'm 22, and I was almost out of college, and I'm now 22, and then I get a letter saying, hey, you passed the language battery exams. Now you need to come take the special agent test. So I remember taking it at age 22, and I remember passing it. And then I get the long background application, 15-pager, and I send it back in. And at the time, because I was living in Austin, my recruiter was out of San Antonio. When I sent back the application, the recruiter calls me back after they've completed everything, and they said, we just looked at your photo and you're just a kid. And when we looked at your date of birth, we thought you were born in 57, not 67. So they go, nobody wanted to let the cat out of the bag that they had messed up, but they said, look, we're going to do this because it's the average age coming to the Bureau even now is still 29, 30 years old. So they decided to put me on hold till I turned 23, and they called me couple of weeks before my birthday, and they said, we're going to interview you, because the minimum age coming in is 23 and the max age is, of course, 37. And they said, we're going to call you a couple of weeks after your birthday to interview you. And sure enough, they did. They called me before my birthday, and they interviewed me after my birthday. And in September, they called me 3 days before the academy was going to start. They had put a class together, and they said, hey, are you willing to come? And at that point, I was working for a company, an import-export company back home. And I said, heck yeah. So gave a 3-day notice, and my boss was cool with it because he knew that's what I wanted. He knew that I was in the process. And the only reason he hired me at the job, and he told me, and this is another good life lesson, is because I was honest with him. And I said, look, I'll give you everything I have. I'll give you 100% every day. I said, but I have applied for another job. And I said, I'm going to leave at some point. Could be 6 months, could be 9 months, could be a year. I don't know. And that guy was a retired U.S. Customs agent at the time, special agent. He had retired and he was running his company. So he says, I'm going to hire you just out of pure honesty because you're honest with me. And sure enough, when they came to do my background check, he just gave me rave reviews as well and all that. So it paid off.
That's fabulous. Thanks for sharing. So I'm wondering, how is the work that you did at the FBI, some of the experiences you've had post-FBI, what led to the creation of you founding the Freedom Shield Foundation? Well,
I will tell you that the FBI back then, human trafficking maybe started gaining some notoriety in 93 with the Bosnia-Herzegovina war. And that's when the UN started showing up, apparently, to do the peacekeeping role. And I think the Albanian organized crime group started presenting, bringing women to sex trafficking with the UN peacekeepers. There's a movie called Whistleblower, and it was about the lady. I think she was a former cop or current cop from Nebraska, I think, that she went out and did that role to do some contract work, and she's the one that uncovered it. And pretty good movie. What I'm getting at is there was no human trafficking violation at the time. There was human smuggling, which is not, there might have been people that were ending up smuggled, that were ending up, being used for sex, but the smuggling was legitimate smuggling. It was getting just people across, paying somebody to get you across so you could start a new life in America. I don't know how much trafficking was involved, really don't know, but the Bureau didn't work it. And even the other agencies that had that violation, like immigration, they always worked it as smuggling. So what we did work a lot of was organized crime. I will tell you that all the stuff I learned tactically, investigative-wise, intel-wise with the Bureau, it came in handy. But I'll tell you, seeing all the need, then I thought, well, man, I'd sure love to be able to use my skills, me and other guys, and be able to do something. So 2009, I was working with Bank of America at the time. After I left Benny Hinn, I did some kidnap ransom work for a while and then went to work for Bank of America. And while I was there, they gave me a lot of leeway to work the nonprofit. And in 2009, Thanksgiving Day is when I got an email from a nurse friend of mine who had just been at an orphanage outside Nairobi, Kenya, 2 weeks prior to Thanksgiving. And she sent an email Thanksgiving morning, about 2 a.m, that 15 guys had broken into an orphanage outside of Nairobi, Kenya, to rob the place. Well, they ended up beating the house mother nearly to death, and they wound up gang raping a 14-year-old and a 10-year-old little girl. So it was Thanksgiving morning for me here in the U.S., and remember my dad was here, and I remember waking up, reading that email, and just being brought to tears. And then it was that righteous anger that swells up, thinking like, how in the world could something like this be going on? When there's people with a heart to fight this. And I remember telling my dad, hey, I want to start a nonprofit. I want you on the board. And then I called a former Navy SEAL buddy of mine and asked him to join the board. He did too. So by Monday, that was a Thursday, Friday, I'd filed the paperwork. Monday, we had filed the paperwork with the state, got approval as a nonprofit. And by Tuesday, we were filing our nonprofit work with the government and had it a couple months later.
Oh, wow.
So we started the organization as Orphan Secure, and our goal was just to secure orphanages around the world. First 3 months, I was putting in my own money to do stuff in Africa and stuff. And then we figured out that maybe we should just do work here on the Mexican side of all the orphanages that are in harm's way of the cartels, and come in, secure them, provide safe rooms, crisis management, upgrade locks, windows, alarm systems, camera, the whole deal, that whole kind of stuff, do it pro bono. And to date, we support about over 5,500 orphans in about 14 countries. We handle all their crisis management, all their kidnappings or extortions, things like that, pro bono.
It's been around for about 10 years. You're the founding executive director. You passed the baton to this Carrie Gurley. She's doing a fabulous job. I've watched many of the videos that she's prepared. They're almost like PSAs.
Yes.
I understand the programs sort of break into what I think of as 3 or 4 categories: rescue, restore, resources, and then more recently, you started a feeding program. And that really caught my attention because at first I was like, well, what does feeding have to do with human trafficking? So maybe you could explain what each of these sort of components of the organization is.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you go working backwards. Well, obviously for about 9 years, we were fully a rescue organization. The Bureau is a thankless job, just like being in the military. You can save the world on Monday, and on Tuesday, hey, what are you doing in the office? You'll be out there working, no parades, no rewards, like, good job. See, go back to work. So that's kind of the mindset of the organization as a whole is, hey, let's go do what we do best and just, raise the money privately as we can with individual donors. So rescue wise, we've been in Thailand, we're in the Philippines. We do work in Libya, Egypt. We spent 3 years in Iraq and Syria recovering Yazidis who are being held by ISIS. We had a couple of deaths in that process as well. I mean, it's not a feel good type job. It's, there's risk involved with doing the work we're doing. And then we do work domestically. We do work in Mexico. So we just launched in Pakistan to do rescues, and we have a methodology on how we do these things. So we have a lot of former FBI guys that are involved, former agency guys, 100+ military special operations types, a lot of cyber guys, a lot of analysts. We could throw more analytical power at counter human trafficking than any government in the world can. We have between 45 to 60 analysts.
Oh, wow.
Most of the guys that travel with us abroad have been with us. I won't take anybody abroad that hasn't been with us for at least a year or more. I already know where they're at with their families. I know where they're at, with their marriage. I know where they're at, with even just more morals, not to take guys abroad to, go to the Philippines and then at night they're going to massage parlors and strip clubs and brothels and all. That defeats the whole purpose of being in town.
Right.
So we're real careful how we vet. We do, our background checks are pretty thorough with everybody. And so we did that for about 9.5 years. We're still doing rescues even now. We just had 60 kids Monday, child soldiers that we pulled out of the Philippines, all young fighters that, and we used former rebels that are working with us to be able to come in, and it was really cool. So we added the trauma care piece when Carrie started coming with us to Iraq, and she was doing counseling with the Yazidis. That allowed me to focus more on the international work. And then we brought in another retired FBI agent to head up the domestic investigative work. So it's kind of cool just having guys who speak the same language. It runs seamlessly. And then the trauma care, her programs that she's written have been fantastic. Our goal is to branch out to about 35 safe houses in 35 cities across the U.S. And that would come with advocates, and that would come with security elements surrounded by it. So there's a lot of work to do when we do that, plus the money we need to bring in to sustain that kind of operation. On any given night, I think there's anywhere between 250,000 to 300,000 people that are being trafficked in our country.
Wow. That number, the 250 to 300, is obviously big. One of the things that really caught my attention, Ro, was the scope and scale of this problem. And in our prior conversations, you had mentioned that it's different in the U.S. than it is outside the U.S. Inside the U.S., it has more to do with the breakdown of the family, which ties into our work at the 21st Century Dads Foundation, making sure dads are present. But outside the U.S., it has to do with more abject poverty. And that the demand for trafficking is really driven, which is embarrassing, but really driven by what's going on here in the United States. And I think I remember, I wrote this down, 70% of the most heavily trafficked people come from the U.S. 50 to 60% are from foster care in the U.S., which is different here because foster care ends at age 18 versus places like, say, Ukraine, where it ends at age 15. So it's putting younger people in Ukraine at risk versus the U.S. 99% of the victims are women and children. 90 to 95% of the traffickers are African-American pimps. I don't know what the term Romeo pimps mean, but I remember you using that. And I'm wondering, are the numbers really that bad? Is this sort of, it seems like overwhelming, right? When you look at some of these statistics.
Sure. I will tell you, I will say this, that Mike Pompeo, head of the State Department, earlier this year, basically, that we do the trafficking in persons report every year, the TIP report, and the United States is number one in the world for trafficking. So that's a fact. That isn't whether you can agree or disagree, but nobody's doing the work that they're doing to find that out. I've heard a number. I remember when I started 10 years ago, the number was 27 million slaves in the world. And now, everybody's saying 40 million. And I'm going, what, did we do a survey globally and ask them if they were enslaved? I mean, who really knows? My point is these stats are, how do we really know, right? The exact amount. I mean, how do we know we have 40 million? Again, I'm not going to argue with that, because to me, if even one is enslaved, then somebody somewhere needs to be doing something to free that one. Okay. So it doesn't matter if it's 40, 400,000, whatever, 40 million. It's still, those people are worth going after. So I will tell you, even if you look at the runaway stats, the stats of runaways yearly, I've seen numbers as low as 400,000, as high as 800,000 a given year. So the question is, one, do we have that many runaways? Who's keeping track of that? Then you hear the stat that within 48 hours, 50% of those runaways will be contacted by a pimp or a trafficker, because they know to pick them up at bus stations. They know to pick them up at malls. They know how to do that. The only thing I have to say to all that is that we're busy. So you know what I mean? It's not like we're sitting around looking for work. Okay. I will tell you that the family breakdown is the crux of the issue here. So with we don't do prevention awareness. That's not what our organization does. We focus more on the rescue and the trauma care immediate deal. We're not even in the restorative care space, which is where, the girls are actually brought back to some form of normalcy, whatever that means. I mean, the trauma that these women go through when they've been trafficked is equivalent to a soldier coming back from war with PTS. And that's a fact. So, if our soldiers come back the way they're coming back, these girls, they can imagine how much trauma care or restorative care they need to bring them back to some form of normal. So we get a lot of calls daily for women that other agencies have picked up and that need a place to put them for a while. And we handle the short-term care, the short-term 30-day type safe house, truly a safe house, till we can put them into long-term restorative care. Some of these girls may be testifying for the federal government. Some may be testifying for local police. It varies. But this is it's a bad problem. I will tell you that when you look at the 1860s, at the height of the Civil War, population of the U.S. was about 9 million at the time. You had at the height of that time period, you had about 800,000 slaves. And that's roughly 8%, 8.5% maybe of the population were slaves. We went to war over that. Okay. We went to war over slavery, over those 800,000 slaves. But let's fast forward now 150 years. I don't know what the math is on that, but to 2020. And let's say we do have 40 million slaves. Let's say even in the U.S. we have 300. Let's go 250,000 people a night trafficked on the streets of America. We have a population of 330 million. What's that? Another 8%, 8.5% of the population enslaved. Okay. And all we're doing are hashtag campaigns. That says a lot about where the American psyche is when it comes to this. You're either going to find people that are passionate about this, like we are, or you're going to find people that are emotional, meaning that they're just moved by a one conversation that they listen to. It's a big deal for that moment. But tomorrow they forgot. Because it is an emotional thing. We've had infant trafficking cases. We've seen organ trafficking around the world. We've seen child soldier cases, 8-year-olds, 7-year-olds being killed, because they're indoctrinated to fight against the military of that country. We've seen 6, 7, 8-year-olds that have been raped by ISIS, recovered when they're 9 or 10. It's a life regardless of where we're at, whether it be American or be a child is a child. And, I've had a lot of guys that have come to us and say, well, are you really making a difference in this? And all I say to them was, hey bro, if that were your kid, you'd want an organization like ours going after them passionately as if it was your kid. You know what I mean? So we don't distinguish whether it's a Muslim boy or girl or an American little boy or girl. We can't.
Well, one of the ideas that comes to mind is the concept of the starfish, right? There's this kid at the shore. There's piles and piles of starfish that have, been washed up to shore, and he's putting them back one at a time. And somebody walks by and says, you're not going to make a difference, right? And he said, well, if you're the starfish that I'm saving, it's all the world. You're making a huge difference.
It's all the world, absolutely.
Even though the problem is gargantuan, right? And it's almost like I don't even know where to start. You just have to put your head down, stay in your lane, like you said, and do what you can do with whatever resources you have.
Yeah.
And, hope that you're chipping away at the bigger problem. And one of the things that I'm inspired by, and the reason that we met, is the work that's being done by Ashley Chapman and her organization. And this has more to do with, trying to educate people, trying to empower people. And I'm wondering, what is it that you've been able to do together, or what's the overlap between your organization and hers?
Let's see. I met Ashley, it was January. It was down in Virginia. It was at a conference at Regents University. I was introduced to her because of the work she was doing. I think she spent a lot of time in the foster care program. She's done a lot of both consulting and activist work in that area. And Ashley then formed her organization to try and unite, different groups that were doing the same thing to see if they could, start teaming up and things like that. And then she does a lot of consulting for a lot of states, and I believe a lot of the things are enacting, and just all the programs that she put together, it just amazing. So we sat in a lot of conferences together, as subject matter experts on panels, things like that. And what I love about her is just how passionate she is about this whole deal. And she comes from a whole, from a legal perspective. We've just had a good friendship and friendship more than anything. And then partnership, is easy. She calls us whenever she thinks we can help. And we've gone back to her the same thing. Everything we ever needed, she seems to find it. Yeah. And there's a lot of different things that we've asked for.
Well, the organization is Alliance for Freedom, Restoration, and Justice. The AFRJ is what it's known by, and which is the same website, the afrj.com. So we'll be sure to include that in the show notes. You mentioned a couple of other organizations in our prior conversations. One is Rescue Her, and the other is A21. And I'm wondering, what's the overlap, or why have you done work with those organizations as well?
A21 is probably one of the largest groups that's out there. When you look at Polaris Project, and of course you've got IJM, International Justice Mission, those are the big ones. A21 does a lot of prevention awareness. They do a lot of work around the world as well. So they do both international and domestic. Early on, we did some work to help them out with some things, and we talked to them from time to time. There's certain organizations that you can, they're symbiotic and the relationship. So that's just someone that you can call for different resources that we may not have. Rescue Her is a little bit small, is a small organization, smaller than A21. They're based here in the DFW area. There's a lot of groups here in the DFW area that are countering human trafficking. They run a hotline as well. Rescue Her does. A lot of the girls that they get calls from may end up with us as well in our safe houses. So there's always going to be some kind of overlap somewhere. We tend to train groups like that on just protocols and for safety and things like that as well.
Excellent. So we didn't talk about Operation Zip Code, but I'd like to, learn more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So from the rescue piece to then Carrie coming on board, we brought the trauma care piece, and then she brought a lot of resources to bear, a lot of the programs that she's written for organizations, even churches, to help teens that might be struggling early on with to stay away from becoming traffickers or she's got programs to counter the demand, which is men who are suffering from porn addiction. She's written programs for parents of traffic victims. And then she's written programs for girls that have left the sex industry with a great success to not go back. I think one of the programs she ran, it had like an 85% success rate, where these were girls that did not return back to the industry. Because there are resources that we had that could come alongside these people and help them not go back. Then the feeding piece is a big deal. We've been using feeding for some time now. You know, when you meet one of the basic needs that every one of us needs, right, to be fed, it's a game changer. We first started using it in Thailand 2012, 2013. We were seeing that there were these villages up along the Chiang Mai border with Myanmar. When the rice crops were down in October, November, December, 9 hours away in Bangkok, traffickers knew that, hey, I can go up to the hill country where the rice crops are down. I can offer $600, $700 US to dad, who at that point has, 6, 7 mouths to feed. And he's going to sell the oldest daughter for the $700, $800, whatever it was at the time.
Wow.
So that, dad would do it. The girl would sign a contract thinking like, oh, I'm going to go back, I'll go do this for a couple of years, come back home. And then, they never come home. We must have interviewed about 200 plus girls in Bangkok at the time when we were there, and none of them were from Bangkok. They were all from the outskirts, the same area. They left a $6 job or $4 job a day to an $8 job in the city or whatever they were promised. Of course, they never got any of that money. And so we realized that if you got 40 families in a village, you could feed them during those 90 days that their crops are down. Not only are you going to the root cause of trafficking, which is abject poverty, but you're in theory, you're feeding the hungry, and you're disrupting trafficking at the same time. So I've met a lot of donors that are very root cause driven. Like, how can we give towards that cause?
That's where the roots for this feeding program that we know as Operation Zip Code started. But is it just in poor countries, or what we might think of as poverty oriented countries, or is it here in the U.S. as well?
So what we've seen over the last several years, and then of course COVID was a big one, that's where it became really blown out of proportion, is when you look at the zip codes across America, or there's stats that come out on cities that said this is the hungriest city in America, the poorest city in America, and they base it on per capita income or food insecurity nationally. I think it's around 16%. Families are going to bed with not enough food. They haven't had the full meals that the rest of us have had. If you look at infant mortality rate, if you look at crime statistics, if we break it down, look where, prostitution is and all those go into play for us under Operation Zip Code. And as we saw abroad, that when you come into a village and start providing food, you also start learning, you also start gathering what the military calls atmospherics. It could be information collection, if you want to call it. And you start learning who the bad guys really are. Is there a little shadow government going on? Who's really is it organized crime who runs the city? Is it really the mayor? Those are just things that you learn. And then if you start providing meeting medical needs, that's another thing that, that people do. So all that's part of kind of the civil affairs program that the military runs when they're abroad. It's a hearts and mind kind of deal, right? That we do everywhere we go. We took a little bit of that similar type program, and we started looking at zip codes here in the Dallas area. Now, during COVID, we kind of pivoted from counter human trafficking operations to feeding because of all the need, people that were without, because they're losing their jobs and their hourly wages and all that stuff. And, I'm certainly not making, it's not a political statement, but it's common sense to me that when we start telling the masses to come from every country into our country, just come at will, open borders type deal, whether we mean it, whatever the intentions are, because we want to help people or because it's politically motivated, I will tell you that the end result is it's a similar to COVID. It's now we're bringing all these people in that when they can't work, there's need. When the kids aren't in school, they don't have enough food now at home. There's a lot of school programs here in Texas that'll send, backpacks home to get people through the holiday because, the kids aren't in school and the only food they get is when they're in school. So when you start bringing in all these masses, they're in need. So we kind of stepped up and said, we need to pivot to running a feeding program. And we partnered with this organization called Kids Against Hunger. And a lot of the product is it's a soy, rice-based, 21 minerals and vitamins and then dried vegetables in a 1 pound bag. And there's 6 meals. It's a casserole. And it literally brings kids out of starvation. That's why it's been used abroad. So we started bringing in churches here, over 2,000 volunteers. Even with all the COVID restrictions, we were able to package almost 1 million meals through COVID. And we were getting that out to food banks and different organizations that were doing the distribution. So it impacted probably 30, 40,000 families. We did that for several months. The very last feeding event, my entire team, including myself, we ended up, and we're all wearing masks. We all got COVID. All 8 of us got real sick. I ended up in the hospital for 8 days with COVID.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So we had one of our other girls got pneumonia. And then even the ones that had less issues several months later were feeling, or having lung issues, breathing issues, things like that. So, no good. What's that statement? No good deed goes unpunished. So it's kind of funny.
Oh yeah.
But anyway, looking back, well, you know what? Here's the deal. We do it again because that's just how we're bent. There's a lot of people in need, and little COVID ain't gonna stop us. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. It's pretty impressive. And what I remember about 1 million meals sounds like it would be really expensive, right? At least by traditional standards. But from what I remember, you're doing this for really almost no money to speak of. It's not really that much money.
It's I think right now we're at about 25 cents per meal, but I think even when we started doing this back in 2011, we were probably at 10 cents, 11 cents, 13 cents at the most per meal because there was no overhead in it. And again, it goes a long way. One of those packages has 6 meals in it. So you're talking about tons. We've used the food for other purposes internationally for negotiations with certain groups that are holding certain hostages. We don't have ransom, but we can, of course, we don't give any groups the food directly. We always have other nonprofits that we're working through. But there's food is. I tell churches and I tell people never to underestimate the power of feeding. And again, this Operation Zip Code is for us to go into the zip codes in most need, and we're probably going to end up identifying houses where women are being held against their will, that are being trafficked, and things like that. So feeding is a very powerful tool.
Yeah, it's a brilliant strategy, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to continue to expand on that. So I don't want to focus on the negative, but I'm wondering what seem to be some of the bigger challenges that you face, the organization faces.
Well, I tell you, relationship wise, we do pretty well. We can go into any government in the world and offer training, and that's usually our currency to get them to then help us with everything we need, both from the military, from the national police, from the their government, their federal police, whoever, like the equivalent of the CIA or the FBI, so that we don't struggle with relationship or connections. Funding is always obviously got to be number one for us because we don't publicize every single operation like the one I told you about here recently that we had with these 60 kids and stuff, these child soldiers. Is not something that we're going to put out on social media or things like that. So usually with our donors, we can give them one-off briefings and just say, hey, here's where your money went, because we're very project driven. I may have a project in Pakistan that might run us $5,000 to start and $1,200 a month. And to a lot of people that, well, that's nothing to a donor, but we're not going to put it on social media to ask for that kind of money, and if we do, it's going to be very vague, kind of like this interview where I'm trying to be vague with everything.
Well, I'm sort of thinking about advice now, and I'm wondering, thinking about our listening audience, which are mostly dads, families raising children with special needs. Mm-hmm. And these are some of the most vulnerable children and young people in our society, those with special needs. Absolutely. I'm wondering if there's any advice that you can offer this audience and then just overall.
Well, I will tell you, staying engaged is obviously, it's one thing. I think when you have to be engaged for the physical needs, right, of your child, I think that the mistake now is our age group, we've used the TV and social media and the telephone now as kind of the babysitter. And I think some of the mistakes that men are making with their own children is not staying engaged and seeing, who they're talking to. Why are they shutting their phone the moment you walk in the room? And we don't want to, we think, oh, they're happy, so let's just let it go. And that's when we find out we've got even the girls that we don't expect that would ever be trafficked have been lured into something otherwise. So I would say number one is staying engaged. Now, speaking of the men, it's men themselves. I will tell you that what I tend to tell men when I speak at organization, other conferences and things like that, where it's all men, I tell them, look, I'm not going to make any kind of religious or political statement when it comes to pornography, but I will tell you that the U.S. is number one for demand in this country for this type of things, sex-related things. And for every man that's out there that has a daughter between the ages of 6 and 18, or even a little bit older than that, I tell men that every time that they click on an image, a pornographic image, they're creating a demand for their very own daughter, because it's a constant need for somebody else on the other side to, okay, that picture's not enough, I need more. And it's not a victimless crime, as many people think. That, I'm just on the web surfing porn, and I don't think they understand the full damage of what the ramifications are to that. There's no woman in this world that wakes up in the morning and say, I think I'll be a prostitute today. No woman chooses that. And Carrie can tell you I think the stat is that 96% of all women out there that are involved in this kind of trade in the prostitution or sex industry, have some form of abuse early on in their childhood. And she even says, I have yet to meet the other 4%, So, everybody we deal with has some form of abuse in their lives. So again, it's not a victimless crime, and there's no woman that wakes up saying, this is what I want to be tomorrow. It's usually out of need. It's out of necessity. It's out of something that's occurred in their background, their past. I would just tell men, I always tell men to teach our boys to be men of honor and integrity.
Yeah, well, simple advice. And I think that what you've done is you've emphasized what the consequences are, right? It's not victimless. And we all have a role to play.
That's right.
Whether we're men or women for that matter. And whether we have typical kids, or atypical kids, or maybe no kids at all for that matter. And really powerful stuff. So let's give a special shout out to our mutual friend, Ashley Chapman of the Alliance for Freedom, Restoration, and Justice organization, for helping connect us.
Yeah, absolutely. She's awesome. We talk as regularly as we can, but she's just very impressive.
Is there anything else you'd like to say before we wrap up?
I wanted to share one story. I'm trying to see if I can tie it back in. It was in the middle of something that we're talking about in terms of the emotion versus passion, to do something. And, I've always told my kids, look, if you're going to be this or that, be the best at it. Don't half bake it. Don't just go all out. Wrong, whether it's for wrong or for good. Even if you're gonna be a bad guy, be the best bad guy out there that you can be. I was telling them, put that effort into everything you do. But I will say this: one of the victims we had in Syria back in 2017 or 2018. One of the networks that we were working with, that we had funded and gave them operational planning and technology and equipment, all that to execute this rescue. They were out in, I think, Al-Raqqa, Syria, and they were looking for a particular Yazidi young girl. I think she was 10 or 11. And they located her. And, of course, we had funding for that particular rescue. They came across a Russian journalist who I think was 20. And I think she was out of the Ukraine or Moscow. I'm not sure. I don't remember all the details. But I remember the network getting a hold of our guy in Iraq, in country, and saying, hey, we found this girl. ISIS had her as well. We think that we can pull her out with us. They said, but we don't, but they want, of course, the money. They're saying, hey, can we get the funding to pull her out? Because we got to cover her meals. A rescue attempt to bring them back out of Syria usually took 2 to 3 weeks, because they had to avoid ISIS. They had to avoid checkpoints. They had to go from safe house to safe house. They had to go smuggle them back in the country. I mean, it was not a simple thing. It wasn't just pick them up and drive home an hour. So there was funding involved with that. There was money that had to be spent. So these networks were going to pay out of pocket or whatever. They wanted to know if they had the money. And we had the funding for this Yazidi girl. And I remember that my guy in country got the call, and then he calls me here in the U.S. and he says, hey, the network came across a Russian journalist that's being held captive. Do we pull her? They want to know if they can pull her. And it was a no-brainer for me, because I was put myself in the position of a father. And I thought, if that were my daughter and I was the dad in Russia, would I want a group like ours to be out there to do the right thing? And for some reason, that whole decision was the right decision to make, was, of course, pull her and we can worry about the money later. Even though we didn't have it, we said we'll worry about it later. But I remember that feeling as a father, that we're going to do everything we can for, I believe that as dads, it's not just about doing everything for our own kids. It's about doing everything we can for anybody that's in need that we have that we can impact directly. And that's the only other thing I would share with dads, is that our kids, and again, with special need kids, are going to rely on dad even more, right? Dad and mom. But anyway, it's at that same heart. If we had that heart around for anybody in need, then that'd be a game changer, I think.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing it. When you asked the question, do we pull her? It sounded like a rhetorical question.
Right.
Why wouldn't you? Right.
Of course you do. Yeah.
It's like the question is sort of being framed as an economic question. Do we have the resources?
Right.
And the sad reality, right, is just that,
right.
It costs money to do these things and there's some risk involved.
Yeah.
You don't think about those things. The average person doesn't think about it in those terms. Right. And because, like you said, of course it's the right thing to do.
The more men that are doing that, to stand up for the vulnerable, and the weak and the defenseless, it's just, I think evil is put down when we have more guys stand up like that.
Yeah, well, from your lips to God's ears, and God does have a special place for people who are doing His work, right? And taking the risks and not being focused on what is in their best self-interest, but in the interest of others. So, thank you for the work that you do.
Certainly, thank you.
If somebody wants to learn more about the Freedom Shield Foundation, AFRJ, Kids Against Hunger, contact you, what's the best way to do that?
Our website is freedomshieldfoundation.com. They can get a hold of us directly through there. They can reach us on Instagram, Facebook, the same way. Anything that comes our way for AFRJ, even Kids Against Hunger, we're a satellite for Kids Against Hunger, so we kind of park that under our nonprofit as well. So we can make sure everybody we can send it wherever it needs to go, whatever the message is.
Ro, thank you for taking the time and many insights. As a reminder, Ro is just one of the dads who's part of the Special Fathers Network, a mentoring program for fathers raising a child with special needs. If you'd like to be a mentor father or are seeking advice from a mentor father with a similar situation to your own, please go to 21stCenturyDads.org. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Special Fathers Network Dad to Dad podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. As you probably know, the 21st Century Dads Foundation is a 501c3 not-for-profit organization, which means we need your help to keep our content free to all concerned. Would you please consider making a tax-deductible contribution? I would really appreciate your support. Ro, thanks again.
All right. Thank you, David. Pleasure to be here.
And thank you for listening to the Dad to Dad podcast, presented by the Special Fathers Network. The Special Fathers Network is a dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. Through our personalized matching process, new fathers with special needs children connect with mentor fathers in a similar situation. It's a great way for fathers to support fathers. Go to 21stCenturyDads.org.
And if you're a dad looking for help or would like to offer help, we would be honored to have you join our closed Facebook group. Please go to facebook.com/groups and search Dad to Dad. Also, please be sure to register for the Special Fathers Network bi-weekly Zoom calls held on the first and third Tuesdays of every month. Lastly, we're always looking to share interesting stories. If you'd like to share your story or know of a compelling story, please send an email to david@21stCenturyDads.org.
The Dad to Dad podcast was produced by Couch Audio for the Special Fathers Network. Thanks again to Horizon Therapeutics, who believe that science and compassion must work together to transform lives. That's why they work tirelessly to research, develop, and bring forward medicines for people living with rare and rheumatic diseases. Discover more about Horizon Therapeutics at horizontherapeutics.com.